We're back in business with the unparalleled Kurt Doolittle.
Good morning, Dr. Brad. How are
A
you?
pleasure to see you, sir.
You too?
Got fresh coffee by the load.
Yes, Brad sent me a message. Get online. We're ready. And I'm like, oh, I gotta have another cup of coffee.
Good, man. This is episode 2032 since I mislabeled yesterday's.
Did you? I don't.
They told me, and I fixed it all.
Did I upload it with the wrong number?
2031 was yesterday's.
Oh, I gotta renumber it then, huh?
Well, you do what it is you do. I apologize for mislabeling it in the first place.
I don't think it was your fault. I think it's because I have the staff meeting from Thursday on the other computer, so I haven't uploaded it. So I think I got us confused. It's my fault. I'll take the hit, brother.
We're good. We're all back up to speed. Everybody do your job. Hit like and subscribe and the notification buttons and I don't even know what all else, and hit them all, and then leave lots of glorious comments. Tell us what you're thinking, because we are very curious to know. Now, Kurt, you say you're all full of mischief.
As my mother would say, vim and vigor.
There you go. So what's going on that's got you full of vim and vigor?
Well, partly complimenting Dr. Brad here. It's quite difficult to do what Brad wrote a letter, an email the other day. And there's a couple of parts of what we do that are quite difficult. The obvious part is just understanding all of it, which is just a lot of work, right? There's a second part is being able to produce the chain of reasoning, given that you know all of it. In other words, pick up some subset, because it really is just one long chain of reasoning, right? And picking some subset of it and using it to explain something to someone. And the third part is, can you do that in operational language? So that's an escalating problem.
That one is tough.
So Brad's accomplished tier 2, which is really quite difficult, right? I mean, it just was kind of fascinating to me that he was riffing off these terms and creating the correct associations. So I just like it because you can see it over the past few months as Brad's gotten to the point where he's got his arms around this whole thing and sort of sees the whole. He said to me yesterday, I understand how all these guys are thinking. No, there's our.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm watching there. It's interesting to watch these conversations. They're having conversations, and I'm like, so it's like you jump into this environment where these guys are having these conversations, and it's like you just don't quite understand what they're doing, and it's like.
It sounds like English.
It looks a lot like English, and it's like, no, they're doing math. It's like watching a bunch of mathematicians and chalkboards.
Yes.
And they're correcting each other and figuring out what survives. And then they incorporate that into their understanding. And that's what's going on. It's like a laboratory.
But it sounds like
it looks like they're just chatting and fighting.
Yeah, it's not. It's math.
They're just throwing it up on the board and see what survives.
I keep telling people we write proofs. The problem is that we're writing proofs in the measurements that are available to man rather than just numbers, right? So we're writing all these proofs, and it's like memorizing a squared plus b squared equals c squared. There's not that many of them, right? I mean, but there are enough of them and there is enough terminology that it's just like learning math or programming, right? And the problem with the programming analogy is programming is actually way easier, right?
It's because it looks so much like English.
Yeah.
And you think you know how to speak.
Yes.
It's like, oh my.
So I was talking to Brad last night. We were having our after dinner. We frequently have after dinner chit chats. And so this is after dinner for me. I don't know if it is for you. It might be after work for you.
It's approaching dinner.
And so I was trying to figure out, and it's one of those things where if you watch children learn, right, learn to speak, they start out with very simple directives, right, or names and directives.
Yeah,
And
no,
they, sorry,
no.
no, that was a bad one. Dad, mom, I like that.
Yeah.
Dad, that was good.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you there.
So you start out with these things, and then you get into a couple of words, right? And then, or complex, you get from monosyllable words to polysyllable words to sets of words to phrases to eventually you get to sentences, right? You have from sentences to sequences of sentences right over. But if you understand what's going on, it's just recursion, right? Right. It's just this continual growth of the scope recursion. So the problem that with it's like how I know that Chomsky is smarter than I am. How do I say this? Is that the scope of recursion is something we tend to call working memory,
right?
Or contextual memory, right? So the problem is maintaining that context as you're getting out into, hey, we're talking about all of human sense perception all across all dimensions, and we're forcing you to use a language that consists of measurements rather than just vague associations. So you've got to test all this stuff. So the burden on working memory as you're trying to learn how to do this is exceptionally hard, right? And so it's like I use Chomsky as an example because I know what's going on in his mind when he's talking. I mean, I can see what he's thinking, right? It sort of, and the scale of his story,
the arc is big.
Is huge, and he can do it. He'll tell a story. You hear me go off on rants, right? Where I tie and weave things together, right? But I get lost fairly often. He doesn't, and so the problem is part of verbal acuity is that ability. Now, so some of us are born with extraordinary ability to hold a working memory, right, or context across working memory, and some of us simply have to work at it. Well, children work at it, and they get there, and they eventually run out of willingness to work that hard.
Right.
But I mean, to some degree, that's what math is. It's just working hard enough to develop your context memory so that you can remember states. States, it's important. Sets and states and transformations. But we're doing names and transformations, actions in an equilibrium. So it's just a broad, and so it's just, and meanwhile, when you're in math, because they've symbolized it and created all these archaic terms, it's easier to disassociate a mathematical expression from ordinary language. But what we're doing is using all these terms from ordinary language, turning them into systems of measurement. And so the problem is you're continually fighting your brain's desire to rely on auto association rather than calculation. And to do that and to weave together, I weave together crazy shit over 45 minutes, right? I mean,
yes.
And I sometimes forget what I'm doing, more than sometimes, often forget what I'm doing, weaving all these pieces together. But that's context memory. Getting to do that and then to speak in causal relations, it's like practicing math or practicing programming. It's just time. And so you watch these guys, and it's the weird ones that stick out, like they can create what we call a balanced equation in language, right? They'll write this guy, I don't remember who this guy is right now. That's right. This guy, Contra Fabian, I don't know who his real name is. He's been with us a while. This guy can throw out a balanced equation. And apparently he's been following us for years or something like that, but I've never seen him before this past year. And this guy throws out a balanced equation, and it's like, there's been a half dozen of those guys so far, but everybody else has to learn it. And so there's a certain, here's my natural inclination,
right,
to think in equilibrium, which is what economics teaches you. and here's my habituation, how much work I've done, right? So you've got this arc here where it's like, it's just hard to do. And I invented it, and it's hard for me.
It's interesting, and it's like what caused me to write that that I sent you was I was engaged in a conversation with in textual format with some philosopher types, and it's like watching them without knowing they don't know what they're doing in the context of it, with that regard to the sloppiness of the terminology they're employing. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm going to tighten them up. And this caused the guy to respond. The one fellow responded, and he said he wrote some books, and he said I would be interested in his book. So I ordered his book, or I have not yet ordered his book because me and my bank are having a fight about my credit card. The sons of bitches took my money on Wednesday and still haven't credited me with their check from their bank from my other account. So I'm unable to purchase his book at the moment, but I'm getting there. Anyway, he said it is the culmination of his 60 years work. So I figure he's 80s. And I'm like, I really want to hear what this man has to say and what advice he has to offer in terms of interacting with the philosophers, because he is one of them. And he recognized the value of the statement that I sent you. He credited me falsely with the
I don't care who gets the credit. I just want to win.
I know. This is the it's the cross we bear, because it's like, since it's unparalleled, it means that there is a cross, there's a crisis, and we're in the crisis, and we're feeling the pressure of the moment more than most people, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say, I find it interesting because it's like the adults in the room sense the danger of the impending storm, and the children want to go play again, right?
Yeah, and the young adults, called the cognitively feminine, want to pretend it doesn't exist,
or they can magic it away.
Yeah, they can magic it
away. By voting.
Technically, it's wishful thinking it away. What's the difference between wishful thinking and magical thinking? Wishful thinking is what a reasonable person does to what do you call it when you take a drug?
Hallucinate?
No, sedate.
Okay.
Sedate yourself. And a magical thinker makes crazy shit up too. So you would say, but Kurt, it's such a fine line between between
I think it's an imaginary line.
Yes, between well, I forgot the term for magical thinking and
wishful thinking and
wishful thinking and magical thinking, which is the topic we're going to cover later today.
Excellent.
So anyway, so it's a huge vast difference. You'd think there was a vast difference, but it's one of those things where, like, we did male means of fictionalism, right? Sophistry, magic, occult, right? And magic, pseudoscience, occult to theology, etc. So we did all these formal, systematic ways by which men come up with their lies. But and you realize once you get up into fictions and fictionalizations, and then you get into deceits like loadings and framings, and the colorful artistry that's available for deception is phenomenal compared to the rather dry, boring act of testimony.
It is. It's boring. It's just the fact, man.
Unentertaining.
Unentertaining is a fair way to phrase it.
Yes. So, but once you realize that there's between we call faith healing, right? Faith healing, where faith healing can come out with white lies, comforting, can work into wishful thinking, right? Which is, well, maybe it'll work out all right, to work out where it will be magical thinking, well, it'll be all right because of these reasons, right? All right. This is a rich spectrum of the female method of deceit,
Yes.
which is all seduction, using her feminine bias and the potential to care, and her non-threateningness, right? To conduct this incredible spectrum of shit. And the more, it's like, I was working on it this morning in preparation for our talk today, and it just gets me so fucking pissed off. It's just so exasperating.
Really?
Anyway, what?
Why does it make you mad?
Well, it's like, I have a house. My wife has my house now. So I had a house in Redmond, all right? And it's got this sort of flat roof that we had paid a lot of money to have fixed. And one of the things I did was I put new drains on the back of the house. And then I said, well, I'll just drain it out to here. But the problem is that it's got to get away from the house, because otherwise it ends up next to the foundation.
Yeah. So
you're digging a hole, right? You're digging a ditch, right? And then you'll find out that the drain is actually way the fuck over there. And so it's every time you discover something, like there's rocks in the way, you've got to dig up the garden, you've got to remove a hunk of fence post, you got to break through the concrete wall, you got to get a government permission to break through the concrete wall of the drain.
That was the rudest part right there, man. Like, you had to obtain the necessary permissions.
So why you say it gets frustrating is all I see is the scope, the ladder of work, the stair of ladder of work we have to do. It just gets me so tired. When you realize we had 50,000 years of suppressing male antisocial behavior, and we're going to try to do in decades try to do in decades the suppression of female antisocial behavior.
This would be a good time to limit our expectations, because it's like, dude, you're suggesting 50,000 years of evolution of human consciousness in about a minute and a half. That's a bitch. Because it's like, think about this, it's like you're going to ask people to recognize that which they don't currently recognize as lies.
Well, I would say it, but it's been done before so many times.
What do you mean?
I would have to look at the what's happened recently in economics to 2008. Oh, that's a narrow thing. I have to look back at the Einsteinian relativistic revolution. I would look back at Maxwell, etc.'s electromagnetic revolution. I would have to look back at Darwin's revelation. I could look back at the fact that wasn't that long ago we thought the Milky Way was the entire universe, yet it's basically irrelevant in the cosmics. We think we're like, not only is our planet irrelevant, not only is our solar system irrelevant, I mean, we basically live in rural Oklahoma from the galaxy standpoint, and our galaxy basically lives in northern Alberta from the universe's standpoint, and God knows where we are in this universe, although I think that's going to get corrected with the next decade or two, because there is a different rate of expansion. It looks like the rate of expansion does differ by direction we look, because they made that decision based on too small a sampling of the sky. Anyway, I don't want to get down to that little one, which is another example of why you must conduct continuous recursive disambiguation. But anyway, we'll go back to reality and say that people have had to go through these changes. Even Galileo's idea of throwing the two balls off the Eiffel Tower, which I guess not the Eiffel Tower, the Tower Pisa, which I guess never really happened. It was actually something else. But I mean, he ran the test, but I don't think it was off the Tower of Pisa. Anyway, something in my mind says that's not exactly what happened. It was how he explained it, not how he actually performed the test. But I could be wrong because there's a lot of shit in my head, and today's Sunday and I haven't had enough coffee yet. Anyway, so so people do. Now, if you look at the legal reforms we've put in place, every time there's been a major legal reform of the scale I'm talking about, it takes about 10 years for it to filter through. The majority of it happens in the first 3 or 4. Because people's adaptive learning curve is only 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
So if you change the environment, right, this is why some government interference is actually useful. If you change the environment to create a game, the rules of the game will provide incentive to adjust. So
right. I think that was my take home from yesterday, which is it's incentives. It's all just incentives. And it's like, they don't need to understand it. They just need to understand the incentive structure in play.
The mouse doesn't understand the maze. It only understands the cheese.
That's good. I like that. That was good. That's
yes.
good.
I have a little fun explaining I'll take some lefty who's being all emotional. I'm just trying to see how they're thinking about a given problem through some chain of argument, right? By the way, I delete these things after I do that because I don't want people to think I really believe this stuff. It was on Twitter and Facebook. I didn't because it was obvious because you could see this whole thread. But in Twitter, it's just a tweet, and I keep finding that people go back and find these tweets, and I'm like making a complete opposite argument. I'm just arguing a position to run a test on somebody. So that's why I delete some tweets. I'll go run an experiment on somebody, but then because tweets aren't contained in a thread, right? I have to go delete them. Otherwise, they come back to haunt me.
Yeah.
But you talk to somebody and this is, well, I just want to thank you, right? This is what I do. I run these things called King of the Hill games. It's how I learn how people think by posing these arguments, and it makes them so pissed off that they were the rat in the maze.
They get mad at that.
Well, I mean, they to some degree they should because it's dishonest, right? I mean, what I'm doing is dishonest.
Is it dishonest?
Is it dishonest? That's a great question.
I don't think it's dishonest.
It's not fully informed.
I think it is. Yes, it is that. It is non-consensual in some fashion.
Yes. So,
but it is. They don't know they're participating in an experiment that you're running.
Right. Yes.
Okay. So
but and it's like the thing is, it's such an IQ test, right? To actually present that, because it takes you have to be very intellectually honest and relatively smart to basically understand that, right? And what most people do is they're just monkeys with they're just monkeys with instincts. And the fact that they can speak a language is just whatever. It doesn't tell us anything about it. And that's the problem with language, especially ordinary language, is that it makes it the reason it's useful is because every fucking idiot right from across the spectrum can still communicate, or it wouldn't be useful.
That's correct.
Right. But the problem is it gives us the illusion that anybody you can talk to is a peer.
That's right.
They're not. And the way you get this, of course, is the degree of abstraction that you employ in the conversation. In other words, how far it is away from it smells good, it tastes good, it feels good, I like it. Right. Which is what happens when you go traveling. People go around the world and they meet ordinary people and they speak in pidgin to ordinary people. Well, of course, if you speak in pidgin, you've avoided any chance of speaking in abstraction. But now go ahead and speak in degrees of deference from one's sense perception, in other words, abstraction, and you'll find that people rapidly diverge from agreeing with you about almost everything. So the problem with language, it creates the utility of the possibility of reaching consensus at different scales, right? But it creates the illusion that it's possible to create consensus at all scales, or it facilitates the tendency of people to engage in false consensus bias, which means that they think they're average or normal, or that everybody thinks like them or whatever. So language is really beautiful, but it easily fools us because we want to be part of the pack. We want to be average. We want to make ourselves perceive ourselves as average, or at least part of the norm, right? And so that we're not an outlier. So this is the wrong way. We want to perceive ourselves as not an outlier, right? It's not divergent. We want to be better, but we don't want to be divergent, right? It is different. So all these factors, these instincts combine together with the use of our language, and
that we don't want to be excommunicated.
Actually, we don't. We're so afraid of our status externally and our self-image internally that we do almost everything to protect it. It's just like it's part of neural economy.
Yeah.
So, or if you have, I mean, and that's what the problem with female neuroticism is that they're hypersensitive to changes in their self-image and status, and so they'll bias all these falsehoods in order to maintain self-image and status. Because if they have to maintain their self-image in particular, what they'll have to do is audit all those emotions that they can't get their arms around. And when instead what they enjoy, especially watch women do this, they enjoy the experience of those emotions. So I always tell my trainer, when I go to the weights, I have to do some clean and presses, and I have to do some bench presses, because the clean and press matters to me, because I need to do my whole body in concert. If I do that, I feel good. So all these, I understand they want to isolate muscles and the whole thing, but that's okay. But I have to start with some full body exercise, or I don't feel good. Now, try to imagine that. So in other words, that's what feels good to me, right? So imagine you're a woman and you want to exercise all your full range of emotions to feel good.
Oh
right?
my.
Right. So I think this is the best analogy I can come up with, right? Is it good enough? Does it make the point?
Yes.
Right. And so the woman, so just like we can organize, one of the major differences between men and women is we can organize more complex sets of muscles over broader ranges. So that's why we tend to be better at full body motion, athletic nonsense, right? They can do it. I mean, some of them can, but men tend to be better at throwing the spear is the great example, right? Watch women throw a ball and it's fucking hysterical. It'll make you laugh every time, right? So, yes. Anyway, whereas their dancing is really fantastic, right? Why? Because what's the difference in feeling time between dancing and ball throwing? It's fascinating. Income, outcome.
Oh, right.
Income, outcome.
Time. Yeah.
Right? Time. Yep. So you see all these things, and I wonder. I'm dumping like great insights here that I don't know if I've captured all.
It is good.
So where was I going? I lost it again.
Women expression. Full body expression, emotional expression. Women need to exercise their full range of emotional.
Yeah, so we did this and we did this. So there's this demand by women to want to experience emotions. So like when a woman is fucking with you, when you're the mate, she's trying to get entertainment by riling you some way, right? So this is the problem. Children will rile her and she will rile her children. That's useful. But the minute it gets directed at a husband, it's not good. And the minute there's no husband, it gets directed to society, it's even worse. And once it's directed to society, and then it's able to be institutionalized through mass media. And then there's people who out there make money by riling up these women, by promoting them with emotional entertainment. You understand? It's the same thing as guys watching porn.
Oh yeah,
it's exactly the same thing.
Yes.
Right, and so we want to feel that feeling. That feeling is good. So they have their thing. For us, it's muscular movement. It's intellectual abstraction. It's crafting things, building, changing the state of the universe, hitting things with sticks, right? It's conducting a hunt. For them, it's more emotional. interaction. So the way we craft the world, they try to craft people. Does that make sense? So we use force on the world. They use seduction and manipulation.
Emotional operations.
So it's like completely. I'll just move my screen around. So it's completely rational that they want to do that, but if it's misdirected, it's fucking horrible, and it's just as rich a means of manipulation and deceit and seduction as all our technologies of science and logic, right? And we just don't see it because, frankly, we're men and we're immune. So you started out with saying, can we educate the public? I think we can. Is it a 10-year problem? It's a 10-year problem on the law. How long is it a generational problem in teaching natural law it's basically teaching behavioral science. Is teaching behavioral science problem? Well, in the Second World War, we had this great movement to teach sciences, which is why we teach it today, right? Instead of practical life, we taught sciences so we could create engineers to fight the Soviets. Well, there's no reason we can't train generations of people going forward. Instead of in the old morality of fictionalism, we can't teach them behavioral science and the scientific basis of morality. So I agree that my view is it's eminently possible. The question is, can you create enough market demand for the truth to get it? So the thing was, what happened with Darwin is he created incentive for the academy to displace the church. Who are we creating incentive for? We're creating an incentive for something to replace the academy.
Well, okay, I'm going to go back to that. It's a good
and credentialism.
That was a good.
I went too many directions.
No, good recursion. Now we're back to these philosophers that I was chatting with, and the wishful thinking and magical thinking.
Yes.
And the philosophers, and this goes to alchemy, okay? And you've heard of the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone turns base metals into gold. And so the philosopher's stone that they are pursuing appears to be the magical incantation that allows us all to cooperate together and peaceably exist. And they're attempting to concoct it and create a new formulation of this nebulous thinking that everyone can nod and agree to, and we can move forward into the glorious future of gold.
That's because they don't understand that epistemology must be through adversarial trial and error, right? Competition. And they're trying to eliminate competition in favor of cooperation. All that means is they're trying to create stagnation, which is that what every single fucking thinker has tried to do in history. So what has happened with Confucius? And
here's what they say. They will say, let me think about that. Just wait. Let me think about that. I'll be back to you tomorrow with a.
So our solution is simple. Maximize adversarial competition but prohibit adversarial irreciprocity. So the thing is, we're saying we don't get there by claiming what's good. You get the good by eradicating the maximum of the bad, leaving people open all goods. They don't have to agree. In fact, we don't want them to agree because it decreases the time-space continuum that they're experimenting in. So there's just they're decreasing computational permutations, or they're decreasing the number and speed of computational velocity. And so what they're searching for is actually cancer. And they don't know it.
Okay, that was too big of a leap. So please explain.
They're searching
audience.
They're searching for the absence of change, of innovation and change. They think it can be changed by consensus when it's actually consensus that generates resistance to change. So
right, stagnation is it's entropic function.
Correct.
Because now you're eliminating differences that make a difference.
You want people to want different things. You don't want them to agree. You only want to create the game where the lying, cheating, and stealing is prohibited. So the problem is,
which is what I call perverse incentives.
correct. So what we're doing is what I emphasize all the time is when we get to a certain scale, we have to focus on the via negativa, right? Not the via positiva. See, they're still trying to solve the ancient problem of what should we all believe?
Right.
Well, we don't have to believe anything. We have to, other than that we want to eliminate the maximum number of ignorance, maximum amount of ignorance, error, bias, and deceit, and create the maximum scope and their surface area of uncontrolled experimentation. See, what they want to do is they don't want to do the work themselves. And this is the secret. They don't want to do the work themselves. They don't want to be able to, they don't want to demonstrate demonstrated competency. Right? They want to just talk and get other people to do the work. The problem is we talked about this yesterday, the further you are from the cause and effect cycle, the least you are able to adjust and be falsified. So we've said this forever, is that the academy tends to go the wrong direction. Right. And this is why the state tends to go the wrong direction. The people tend to go the wrong direction. What happens is that some people defect from the wrong direction, and you can't predict which defection will succeed.
Correct.
Right? But it's always defection from a direction that creates an innovation. So the problem is we want to create the maximum opportunities for defection within the limits of reciprocity.
Right.
We want to, right? And so they're trying to do the opposite. They're trying to come.
Okay. Yes. It's an interesting function that I'm going to point to the Babylonians now, since I've been working my cuneiform art projects, right?
Yep.
Is that they worked in clay.
Yes.
And they invented the tablets and the writing, and they were working in clay, which is a via positiva function, right? Making impressions in clay and distance themselves from the work. That's the guys who are the elites in Babylon are like, they're gonna be the one administering the tax thing and let the farmers farm, right? Mm-hmm. And let the alphas alpha and administer everything and manage the writing and scribing and looking at the stars that are far removed from the actual production. Mm-hmm. There you have it. That's who we're conflicting with here.
Right.
That
I'm not anti-intellectual per se. I'm anti untested claims, right? That are false promises of evasion of the laws of the universe.
Right.
The promise that we can have non-competition. We can have non-conflict, but we can't have non-competition, right?
I
have a hard time.
I don't know that they would say they're anti-competition. I don't know that they would agree to that statement. They don't act in a competitive fashion, however.
Yeah, what is the argument though? The general argument is that those who can't do teach. Right? It should be those that have done teach. Right. I actually have an appreciation for the guys who work in research and then become professors, versus the people who become professors to become professors.
That makes sense.
Right. And the problem is, of course, is that it appears there's almost zero use and utility on the liberal arts education system for producing research, because it looks like it's all the best research is done outside of the academy. Now, I'm not sure when that comes to history, especially economic, legal, and military history and technological history. I mean, obviously, there are people I can quote endlessly who've done research in technological history, right? Or Charles Murray, of course, has done Human Accomplishment and this kind of thing. There's all sorts of history that can be done that isn't storytelling. One of the more interesting features I've seen of late is the Heritage. Is it Heritage? Yeah. Has a wonderful set of conversations between Niall Ferguson, Victor Davis Hanson, and McMasters. What's his name?
I don't know.
And I can't remember the fourth guy. And they're having this conversation. And when I read what's his name? Ferguson's economic history, it's quite good. But if you listen to his advice on geostrategy, it's fucking horrible. Right? And then you listen to McMasters on one end, which is a Today guy, and Victor Davis Hanson on the other. You realize these guys are orders of magnitude. I mean, the problem is when you get a person who's an interviewer that's not competent enough to interview someone like Hanson, he can't actually say anything smart enough in the context of the conversation. You get him and McMasters
because you're operating with too narrow or a wide of a caliper to be able to cause him to focus down and make some very point insight.
But you get McMasters and Hanson there together with answering some interviewer, and they go back and forth, and you've got all of modern military history and all of ancient military. You've got this incredible body of work by these two great fucking minds. You know, and I've been a fan of Hanson. I mean, I can't actually remember I've lost track of when I started reading his stuff, right? You know, but I just remember, it's Hanson, I'll just read it.
Absolutely.
Right. You know, and I have like one tiny disagreement with him, right? Because
that intrigues me.
Well, because he says it starts with the Greeks, and I say it starts with the Indo-Europeans on the steppe, and that's just because he started his education and his writing before we knew what we knew about genetics and the steppe. And you know, my work says, well, it's pretty obvious how the steppe has to be organized politically, like democracy, and this works its way into the agrarian capture of the state, and then it works its way counterclockwise around the Black Sea into Greece. Well, I mean, that's, you know, in Anatolia. So I mean, this system that happens, sure, you got Sparta, right, which was the most closely resembles the original European. You get Athens, which is the democratic one, right, and you get Troy, which represents the authoritarian one, right? And so you've got the three dimensions right there, right? And so I just find it really fascinating. So it's like, but the outgrowth of all three of those things is the Indo-European group evolutionary strategy. And so he does, you know, whether I could convince him or that, I don't know. But that's my only debate. Is like, I'm saying, well, yeah, it begins to be written down by the Greeks because it's visible to us, but the origin is back there.
That's right.
The only place it could be forged, the only place it could be forged was the steppe.
The Greeks came from somewhere. They came from somewhere.
It's just people, they just move around. Now, and the thing is, when the Indo-Europeans, I can't tell if, does it look like I'm going counterclockwise?
It's clockwise.
I'm going clockwise to you?
Yeah, so this is
counterclockwise. So I want to go this way, counterclockwise.
Yeah.
So
I got one. I figured it out.
They go counterclockwise around the Black Sea, right? That's what happens. So they go, right? And so you get Troy, Athens, and Sparta, right? And then you get over there, you get the Etru, right? The Etruscans, right? And you know, all this stuff just plays out over time, and it's just distance. Right. So the problem is we're talking about guys who go in and they kill all the men and they fuck on keep all the women. Right. I mean, that's what they do with the Indo-Europe. It's just they get a hold of a territory. The young guys go out and conquer. And this process repeats. So they take all of Europe this way. So, of course, when you get to the Spartans, we say, oh, that's terrible. I'm like, actually, the Spartans are just showing us. In this
that's the vestigial. That's the most like they're like.
Yes.
It's like the least civilized among us.
Yes.
The most like we are originally like. Yeah. Wow.
right? And so the Greek, he's right in that the Greeks expand the franchise to all these farmers, right, in order to increase their numbers, and that they invest in ships instead of armies, and ships are capital that makes you profit in downtimes, where armies make you costly in downtimes, right? Hence why the Romans could police the Mediterranean and not the continent, and hence why we can police the world by the seas, but we can't control the world island, which is Eurasia, because it's just cheaper. It's the Navy is so Blue Water Navy is the most expensive military you can build. However, you can, if you build it, you can police the planet, which is the English and the Dutch demonstrated. Anyway, I'm going off too many tracks now, but that my basic disagreement with him is not really a disagreement. It's an improved. It's an improved explanation.
A refinement, yes.
Right.
Or
so,
increase.
But I mean, you just when it's like listening to Scalia talk. He didn't give that many. I mean, I've probably seen every talk he's ever given that was recorded, and I've read everything he's written. Right. The problem is he's trying to talk down to people. There's nobody there. I mean, if I could have had that conversation with him, it wouldn't be me selling this idea. It would be pulling it out of him and translating it. And so the legitimacy would have been possible. So when I listen to Hansen, that's what I see. And I love seeing he and McMaster's together because Jesus, I mean, those two fucking guys, that's like modern data points and ancient data points. Yeah. And they both agree on how people really behave. And then you have Ferguson, who's a typical intellectual, right? He's like, but what about the risk? What about the risk? I'm like, you're an economic historian and you can't calculate geostrategic risk? What the hell is going on with you? So I don't know, man. I went up on a rant there.
That was a good little rant. And it was interesting, and it's like it got to bring into focus the origination, and it got to the Bronze Age, man. Got all the way up through the Bronze Age.
Well, and the Bronze Age could only happen on the steppe because the urban centers had the free capital and the to fund specialists and trade sufficient to develop bronze, right? And you had to have those folks out in whose name somebody put in the comments, the names of not Tocharians, the people who got the horses. Anyway, they got the horses. No. And then by the way, I'll talk about Scythians in a second. And then you have the wheel. The cart looks like it comes out of old Europe. So, okay. So they're in this junction of these three technologies, and they have giving them an economic means of converting a heretofore unusable territory into a usable territory because they have, oxen, carts, and wheels, so they can carry their domestication with them and their tools. So they have the opportunity to make use of the kind of fixed capital that agrarian societies have to use, or at least some of it, while actually taking advantage of a territory that is almost impossible to occupy. So just like there's a fortress Nile, to some degree, there's a fortress steppe. Yes. Think of it that way, right? And so they were able to make use of this new thing, which exploit this new resource. What are you looking at? You're looking at.
I'm trying to. I find it interesting because it's like this. It's like the fortress of the steppe is like it's defense in depth. I'll run away until you stop chasing.
Exactly.
It's like, and I'll burn everything that you could possibly use on the way. That's how it works, man. It's like impossible to come after me. You can't.
And what military? Go ahead. Yeah. And what military still uses that strategy? Russia.
Yeah, because it works. It's just rough. It's like, okay. So, but yeah, it was a funny image to come to the fortress steppe. It's like
fortress steppe.
We can live here forever.
Ever.
We just move around until you can't find us anymore.
And then you raid.
Yeah, we'll be back. We'll be back.
That's what the Muslims did. Well, from the desert, they used the fortress desert. And so they would retreat into the desert. No, you can't chase them, right? All right. And then they would go raid trade routes until you fell apart, right? And they would use raiding techniques on armies instead of traditional phalanx.
Right.
So the whole study of these technologies shifting because of geography, it's actually.
What's also interesting is the asymmetrical warfare.
Yes.
And it's like, so asymmetrical warfare is noteworthy for the audience, which is symmetrical warfare is much more predictable.
Yes.
And it's like, and asymmetrical warfare, someone's going to get hurt. Like, it's going to kill somebody. We don't know who, but it's like there's David and Goliath. Someone is going down.
Well, symmetrical warfare is a competition between overcoming one another's strengths. Asymmetrical warfare is the problem of exploiting one another's weaknesses, right? And so you just have to the primary weakness is what we call the OODA loop, which will tie back to stuff you like to bring up, is the OODA loop, which is maneuver. So, I mean, what does a plane allow you to do? Maneuver. What does a tank allow you to do? Maneuver. What does a horse allow you to do? Maneuver. What does a chariot allow you to maneuver? What is, and so you learn quickly that maneuver is the maneuver. In other words, not being where the thing is going to hit is turns out to be the best.
That's the right answer to the quiz, right?
Right. And so what do you think evolutionary velocity is? It's the not being there.
Right. Be at the right place at the right time and not in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Don't be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So what is a hyperadaptivity by the European model of suppression of reciprocities with liberating the maximum number of innovations by reciprocity, by producing status and hierarchy by contribution to the commons, which is expressed in the market, which rewards the largest number of people. Did I go on a long enough chain yet? Rewards the number of chains, which reduces the cost of existence for all people in that chain in that market. Therefore, thereby you've contributed to the whole commons. So we have maximized the maximization of innovation, adaptation, and evolution by directing the expression of dominance to the production of commons, which reduce the costs of goods, services, and information for all members of the polity, which only becomes a virtuous cycle, which then allows more experimentation because of the reduction of costs for people to produce more innovations that are absorbed by the commons. What does everybody else do? The Chinese, they're like, well, they actually suppress technological innovation because it would be
destabilizing. Yes.
What did the Muslims do? They suppressed informational innovation because it would be destabilizing. So I just want to.
Yeah. So it goes to this stagnation and cooperate. It's like suppression of you call them defectors. I think that's not the defectors from the norms or their innovators. We maximize the innovation is the key.
Right. The problem is it's cheaper to innovate by deception, fraud, and irreversible, right, than it is to innovate by innovation, discovery, innovation, and product production. Just like it's cheaper to lie than it is to tell the truth, which is why
I never found that to be true. I can't remember the lie well enough. I'm not smart enough to lie very well.
My wife used to say, you're lying. I'm like, I'm not lying. I'm stopping you from, I'm not so much lying, like trying to get something, as I'm lying in defense, right? No, I lie in self-defense, which is,
camouflage.
I need to, what?
It's camouflage because
it's just like, because it's like most of the time, almost everything I do is like, leave me alone. I don't want to think about that or solve that problem for you. Right? I mean, that's like, if I think about any time I lie, that's all that's going on. Just leave me alone. You don't belong in my head. It's none of your fucking business. I don't want to talk about this, whatever. Right? Right. That's like, but when you have a wife who's got OCD, right, wants to interrogate you constantly. So what I developed as an alternative was I would just creatively lie, which is I would make up bullshit stuff, which would lead her down this chain of gullibility to the point where she said,
"Oh, you're so
bullshit," right?
It's all right.
So you stop lying per se, and you tell stories that to deflect. Because I just like, fuck, leave me alone.
Right.
Or the problem I've had with most company as I've run is that I'm like, the truth is, if I explain it to you, you won't understand it. That's why you have to trust me. Or my favorite one, if I explain it to you, you'll try to take advantage of the explanation and you'll interfere with it. So it's better that you don't understand what I'm doing. And so what happens is you develop business partners who know that's what you're doing and they just leave you alone. Right. So that's how it worked for me. Right. It's just like because that people, it's like the market problem. If knowledge gets into the market, people will take advantage of it.
Of course.
Right. Well, so the problem is that they'll take advantage of it, trying to outwit it. They won't try to take the same advantage. They'll try to take a personal advantage.
Yes. Yeah. So they'll try to take irreciprocal advantage.
Right. So I would very often, put a strategy together and do my strategy training session. And I tell them what they're needed to do, but I don't tell them everything. Because I tell them everything, they'll all try to game it. Right. So is that lying? Well, it's in order to prevent, to create a commons. So this is the problem with the problem of being truthful.
Yes.
Is you can only be as truthful, right? It's different. Lying to create a white lie, right? A white lie to comfort, but I almost like there's a gray lie, which is to preserve yourself from a fault, right? And a black lie, which is to obtain a benefit at someone else's expense. And what I call a purple lie, which is when you're telling a lie in order to cause someone harm, even though you're not going to benefit from it. Right? But there's the other side is like, well, there's a white lie, but there's also something else, which is to not give people information that would cause them to adopt incentives that are contrary to the interests of the group.
Right, to cause them to defect from the group in a manner that is harmful to the group. Right.
In other words, when you're trying to produce a commons, there's some things you just can't tell people because it will provide incentive for them to privatize your attempt to construct a commons.
So that would qualify as a protective. So it's
defensive.
It's not a lie. It's not a lie. It's a it's a necessary for the defense of the commons.
So this gets into military. Why don't we talk about military strategy? Because if the information got out, it would benefit the enemy, right? But it would also cause our people to behave differently from the plan that would help us defeat the enemy. So there's this defensive methods of what I call obscurantism, right? Which is to not give that information that would create sufficient incentives for people to act contrary to the common interest, right? And so there's the other side of that. Now, in that side, I am fucking guilty. Normally, if I make a mistake or something, I'll either make a joke about it or say, yep, I was wrong. The problem is people say, Kurt, you don't ever say you're wrong. No, I just don't make a big deal about it. I just say I'm wrong. Right? I was wrong about that. Or I fucked that up, or I have a continuous fault I exploit, I fall prey to all the time, right? But on the other side of a defensive line, right, which is that I do it. Now the problem is, what does the enemy claim as defensive line?
Okay.
See, they use irreciprocity, loading and framing, and false promises defensive line. That's what they think they're doing. So the problem is, I'm not using irreciprocity. I'm preventing defections from the production of a commons. In the same way, you create a via negativa.
Well, you're preventing theft is what you're preventing.
You're preventing a theft, right? And so I'm using obscurantism to prevent a theft. And so so it's really easy when we talk about lying proper in social construction, because they're engaged in attempts to produce a theft and irreciprocity. But when you're talking about informational incompleteness, which violates reciprocity, right? It violates the principle of fully informed, then you're over here with defensive partial information. Now, the way you say this is you say, I'm not going to tell you everything because this would cause this could cause problems. What you have to understand is just this. That's how I manage my board. That's how the military manages its soldiers. That's how the politicians should manage the population. Instead, they did the mask mandate thing and whatever, right? They lied about all this medical stuff, right? And rather than say, I'm not going to tell you all the truth because it will cause misbehavior in the population, right? What I am going to tell you is that as far as we know, we're doing the right thing. Well, this isn't discomforting to the neurotics, and the politicians are highly in service of the neurotics.
I must talk about this for a second. Since I did my little duty today, I saw my 19 people today. And
you saw 19 patients today.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, I just want everybody to understand. Brad saw 19 patients before he got on this video.
That's right.
That's pretty impressive.
I got up late too. Really late. I was like, okay, it was very busy. But it was like, I ran into this lady and she's tested herself for COVID 3 times. And I'm like, in 3 days, I'm like, why? Why are you doing this? Stop it. Stop. They gave away all these home tests and it's like, why are you? They're trying to feed this neurotic thing.
That's right. Right. Because they want to feel the emotion.
But
that's the problem with neural economy.
Okay. What's the problem with neural economy?
Is that your body evolved to have a baseline stimulation, right? You will seek to fulfill that baseline, right? You will seek to not overload that baseline,
right?
But you will seek to fulfill that baseline. If you don't, you get what we call boredom, but the actual extreme of boredom is a kind of panic. So they're trying to get emotional fulfillment, right? In order to sedate their neuroticism, which escalates into a panic. So does that make sense? Yeah, so it's what's happening is it's the problem of neural economy isn't that it's one-sided. It's an equilibrium.
Right.
Neural economy can be overloaded, but it can also be underloaded.
Right. That generates anxiety.
Correct. And so where that comes from is that if you're rested, you evolved to go out and search.
So run around and do stuff, man.
Right. Exactly. And so the problem is if you don't have a way to direct that energy, it becomes like being a caged animal.
You're the cat that's pacing the
correct
cage.
Exactly.
Waiting for the opportunity to go outside and jump on that kid.
So the higher neuroticism, the more fear you have of not absorbing information by searching and hunting. The problem is for men, it's really environmental. It's pretty easy.
We're externally oriented.
We externally focused, but they're internally focused. And so they're always worried about what is so-and-so thinking about me? What is this going to happen? It's always these external factors of the people who perceive they're powerless.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you a story.
Oh my God.
You're going to like this one because this one.
I see it in your face.
This is a funny story because it's so it turns out my business partner and I both did our first rotation as a medical student in the same office. 3 years apart.
Oh, interesting.
So we did the first 2 months, same rotation, same office. We knew the same doctors when we were first green proto doctors, right? So there's one of the doctors who owned the facility. She says this, she gave me this magic incantation. She says, okay, you can tell that woman is an anxious person, okay? A neurotic, she called her.
Yeah.
And I said, how can you tell? And she says, 4 or more rings.
That's so true.
And I'm like this.
I would have never got there.
For 25 years, I've been like this. I'm like, fuck me. Right on the money. And I wouldn't tell it to you unless it was dead nuts on. Because it's just like that. It's like, you just see it and you're like, data point. That's all I need to see. And it's like under stimulation, right?
Correct. It's stimulation insufficient to suppress the level of neuroticism.
Right. So it goes to this. It's like women that don't have enough kids.
It's all it is.
Right.
It's that simple. It's so frustrating that it's that simple that, it's exasperating.
Wait, why?
Well,
why is it frustrating?
Because it's just more evidence that we're just turd flinging monkeys.
Wet bots.
Turd flinging monkeys that can talk. And the talking gives us this wonderful illusion. It allows us to do some great things, but it also masks a great deal of sins. I mean, I have a sister that's pretty neurotic, right? She's a little blonde hottie, right? Which everybody knows this, but one of my mistakes in life isn't marrying her off to some rich college friend of mine, right? Which would have been fantastic for her, because you can't trust her judgment about as far as you can,
I understand you.
As far as you can kick a boulder.
Right.
But she's adorable. My mother didn't like her, but I love her, right? Because she's just basically, throw flowers in the air, saying happy things, pet kittens and dogs and puppies, and take care of children, and and gossip and rally and giggle and whatever. She's just a fucking machine. Well, it is, but she has to be where that can be exercised.
That's right.
Or else she's
or she gets
a problem.
Yes.
Or she's a problem, which is what bothered my mother. And for me, I just found it entertaining. I found her entertaining.
Yeah.
Because, right. So I'm a guy. It's still what I find entertaining in women, right?
That's right.
I find femininity.
She's perfect. She's
perfect. Perfect. That's what I said. She's perfect. She's got lots of blonde hair, blue eyes, great skin, perfect smile, big tits, great. Give her 12 kids, keep her busy, give her enough money so she doesn't have to worry too much, and you're going to be a happy guy, because she'll basically screw you 3 times a day if you want. So, I'm talking about my sister. This gets back to her. I'm fucked. Anyway. I'm really trying to compliment her. It just doesn't sound like it, but I am.
That doesn't get a much higher compliment. No.
So, so I'm just like, okay, great. Well, that's just neurotic. She's got a high neurotic factor, which is she's got to have that emotional stimulation to deregulate the neuroticism, right? My other sister's the opposite. She's a stoic, right? It's just so funny that they're opposite ends of the spectrum. In my other sister's, sit in the corner of a chair, work all day, nothing flusters her.
Yeah.
She has social anxiety, but aside from that. So it's just kind of funny that both ends of the spectrum in the sisters. But
expression, that's interesting, yes.
But anyway, what point was I trying to make about you were talking
neural economy.
So the problem is we think of neural economy in the overloading, because that's what you and I talk about all the time, right? But the real problem, it's also the other problem, is if there's not enough stimulation to neural economy, you get what it is. And this is why you get men internalize it by checking out or becoming aggressive and violent or criminal, or most commonly drug abuse. Yeah. And women get it by being what we call psycho or promiscuous or undermining and drug abuse and etc. So we externalize this failure of neural economy differently. But you can overload those people and make them fail, and you can underload those people and make them fail. So there's this whole thing of when we used to be in these bands and tribes, which there'd be less than 100 of us. You've got all this regulation around you.
Right. Normative functions.
Right. And people are constantly talking. It's just great. I would like to see more. They keep doing these interview videos of primitive tribes, but it'd be better to just set up the fucking camera like
a trail camera, right?
Like a trail camera, and just watch what they do all day, because it's basically prattle. So it's basically like being connected to the internet all the time, and so you're not dependent upon your processing alone.
That's right.
You're part of the
you're in a waveguide function. There's a vibe coming in all the time that's saying you're okay. we're okay.
That's why I say, I mean, people, if you have 6 kids, it's amazing to me how stable people from large families are for the same reason.
Oh yeah.
We know single childhood is not good. Single motherhood, single child is not good. But if you can get a full parent family and 2 boys and 2 girls, you're in good condition. You increase those numbers, you're in better condition. Do you still get fuck ups in large families? Of course you do, because, but I'm just saying, all other things considered, the wave guide,
That's right.
It just turns out to be better because it teaches you compromise. Teaches you compromise, which is the problem, which is why we send kids to school. We don't subject them to constant adversarial competition, and they don't have to be engaged in continuous compromise across generations. One-room schoolhouses were like families,
Yes.
right? You got more stable people out of it, right? And you could more easily identify, right? And you don't have to say, you must pass grade 8. It's like, you pass this test. Like, I finished 7th grade in like December. I had nothing to do with them. December to June, right? So I just read books, right? I mean, so, just frustrating. So this socialization process helps us maintain our distributed equilibriums, and we want distributed differences in this neuroticism and extroversion,
right,
because we want to cover the sensory time-space continuum,
yep,
right? Yep. And so we want those variations, but if you like isolate people in rabbit warrens and they don't learn to understand and adapt to, right? Or then we're throwing all the cognitive burden on the individual, and it gets increasingly difficult without without family, without society, and without norms to defend against the downside of which is neuroticism. And it gets increasingly hard to care about getting fully loaded. So what you see is people check out. So that's what's happened to guys. No adversarial competition, no socialization, insufficient training. All right. So they're just checking out, because frankly, video games are pretty awesome.
They're better and better, but they're not as good as reality, in my opinion. But that's just,
well, they're not as good as reality if you're you or me.
I understand.
Right.
I understand.
Reality for me is like, I mean, I basically need a dog shock collar for competition, right? Because if the truck starts rolling by, I'll chase it, even if it runs me over, because I can't control myself because it's so good, right? But there's a lot of, not every guy's like that. I mean, I guess I must have the Napoleon thing, or I'm short. I got a show I can play with the big dogs. I don't know.
Oh my, I like that. So that's good, man. It's like, so there's an interesting function, which is, it appears that, so we're going to talk about this Babylonian thing again, because it's like homogenization and generating underloading intentionally as a mechanism to generate neuroticism for the purpose of driving and controlling the crowd from the center.
Yes, use uncertainty to feed neuroticism, or you can actually use uncertainty by claiming some sort of oppression or threat to drive neuroticism to demand attention so that you can control a population. Right, that's what they do, and so they create these things. Whereas, as I tell, if you turn the fucking TV off, right? If we shut off all news, right, and then we limited, we cut this whole woke thing out of the we criminalized woke. Then it would be surprising how normal everyone would see the world.
It wouldn't take long.
It really wouldn't. I mean, one of the things that I liked about living in Ukraine is I didn't have any news. Right, if it wasn't available on the internet, and you got to understand, even the difference between 15, 16, 17 and today with what's on the internet is huge, right? So I'm over there from 12 onward, and to me, I just never saw news unless somebody sent me a Facebook post,
Right.
right? And I just ignored it, and you realize how happy I was.
I can only imagine just
by not having it.
Right.
Yeah, it's like one of the reasons I got much happier after I just cut down my social media to just Twitter, because I don't have to expose myself to all the crazies. And the crazies on Twitter they get rid of the hostiles fairly quickly. So at least the crazies on Twitter tend to be less hostile.
Oh,
Anyway,
very good, Kurt. That was a pretty good little round right there.
So we're gonna pause.
How do you want to do this? Shall we get some more coffee and then begin to work?
Let's pause it, get some coffee, and then we'll go into some discussion. We'll start off with deceit, because we've already touched on it here, because I was prepared for it.
Good.
And then we'll go into sex differences in strategy, and we'll start again with the cognitively feminine hierarchy of methods of deceit, and tie that into the grammars a little bit. And I think that'll be the overview people sort of need in order to systematize.
Yeah.
Once I cover enough examples of storytelling, a certain ethnicity that tends to talk a lot will have a very hard time, because the more people understand what's going on, the more resistance will happen to that method of storytelling, because really that's all they do. All right.
Right. So I'm now going to pause the recording. Very good. We're back. Kurt, he's got his coffee, got my coffee. We were having some side banters, and now we're getting too serious. We had to start recording again.
Well, let's just pick it up.
Yeah.
Let's talk about. So what we're talking about is again the problems of philosophy. You don't see it because it's on my screen right now.
Oh, I'll share it.
Well, no, I don't want to put it.
Okay,
it's on my computer. It's on one of my screens. It's not on the one I've prepared for today. But I had why philosophy is over. So Brad and I started talking about the problem he's having talking to philosophers, and as you saw in the last conversation, of course, I think they're all worthless. But to say, I said that just to get that reaction out of Brad.
No, okay, sorry.
What are you sorry for? I mean, that's the whole point, is to get the reaction out of you.
It worked.
That worked. If that works, that's fine.
It degraded me. It's just okay. I'm good.
You gotta fix your focus on your camera now.
Oh my. I don't know how. What did I do? Oh, it's because I disappeared. There I go. It's because you degraded me and my camera. My whole system was demoralized. Okay.
Anyway, he's talking about this, and I'm like, well, is there value in teaching intellectual history? Is there value in teaching religious history? In other words, comparative religion. Is there value in teaching economic history, technological history, military history, political history? Did I say economic history already?
Yes.
Legal history. Now, if I were to tell you that my whole thing would be teach geography, teach economic, technological, and legal history, and the rest of it's all nonsense, which is all self-congratulatory, not drivel, because those are the three things that are actually empirical.
Wait, say the empirical ones again. So economics, economic history, technological history,
and military history.
There you go. Okay.
And I would say, well, then you say, well, Kurt, you always talk about art history. Well, art history is just the history of technology, right? I mean,
there you go.
We don't think of it that way, but I certainly studied art history as the evolution of the technology of aesthetics. You certainly look at it that way. So all these what about literary history? Sure, there's certainly a lot to be said about the convergence between written history, the history of thought, philosophy, and the history of literature. Those three things form a very interesting triangle that I think is worth studying, just like economics, law, and military strategy form an interesting triangle. So the same way that pseudoscience, sophistry, and occultism form an interesting triangle. So there's multiple ways of looking at this, and it's great. But the whole problem is we're teaching these things in silos. And so the example I gave when Brad and I were talking is let's say that you have to invest in each method of thought. So let's say if you invest in learning mathematics, or invest in learning programming, you'll invest in learning physics and chemistry and whatever, but you also have to invest in learning history, learning literature, literary history, and the literary method, which includes screenplays and all other crap. And you learn, sorry, I didn't mean that in this sense.
All right, sorry.
And so the same thing is with intellectual history. The problem is that we don't think of intellectual history as fantasy moral literature, and that's what it is. And so
philosophy is what you had said.
Yeah, philosophy is fantasy moral literature. And so just like there's fantasy literature in literature, ordinary literature, and there's history as it's somewhere between narration, storytelling, and fiction, right? I mean, because all history has got to be centered around some theme, or you can't comprehend it because it would just be disparate facts. So they have to tell a story. So you don't think of history and literature and philosophy as just the same thing, as some variation on fantasy moral literature. And so the problem with philosophy is you pay this high cost to get into it. And because you've paid that high cost, you don't want to pay the high cost again for learning physics, or for learning mathematics, or for learning programming, or for learning chemistry or biology or economics.
Right. Well, I would say there's no incentive to do so if you can make a living doing philosophy.
Correct. So my problem, of course, is that I think, philosophy is just a fucking joke, and has been for over 100 years now. Now you can say that there's been progress in philosophy. I would actually there's been progress in converting philosophy to the scientific method, and converting linguistics into logic. But I'm not sure there's been any progress in philosophy. There appears to have been none. And everything I can see in it turns out to have been false. Does this mean that so what's the difference between philosophy and philosophizing and theorizing? And that's the change that's happened, is we've moved from philosophizing, which is generally a conflation of the good and the true, to theoretizing, which is the good from which we determine a true. Excuse me. God damn it, I got it backwards. Theorizing for the true from which we determine goods.
Right.
So I just see the 20th century as working our way through logic and ending up realizing it's not mathematics. Right. And working our way through mathematics and realizing it's computational reducibility is limited, right? And the same thing with logic. Linguistic computation is limited, and it's falsificationary, completely the opposite of what we thought in both fields. And so you have all this happen. So I don't know, but when I talk to philosophers, they're using essentially set theory still instead of operationalism, just like mathematics is using sets rather than operationalism, whereas computation is using operationalism, and physics is using operationalism, and we in incentives are using operationalism.
Oh, that's quite interesting. That's a distinction that is useful to bring to bear in conversation with the philosophers.
So this is why I say, now that you've got this, I think you've got your arms around it now. Though I say what went wrong is Babbage understood operationalizing, and he didn't create a theory of it. That theory took all the way. It's not that computation didn't improve, but it wasn't till Turing that he wrote it down as a theory. And it wasn't till Chomsky's interpretation of Turing in linguistics that got us to continuous recursive disambiguation to the point of, and I'm the one that's taken that and said, okay, here's the fundamental law of the universe, continuous recursive disambiguation at a point of stable relation that we call an identity that persists, right? And so, I mean,
I just find this to be just stunningly, it's just funny to me, right?
Why?
It's funny to me because it's like this. It's like, because the professors, the philosophers were talking about God, which is how I ended up in the conversation I was in. And it's like this, I'm like, what's interesting is this, it's like, look, is the operationalization of understanding allows you to understand God, the creator of all, that didn't destroy, that it lived, the identities which survive persist, right?
Correct.
It's one of the secret names.
You repeat that because you're.
Yeah, I know. I got it.
You're shuffling, but lost it. So say it again.
Okay. Is to have identified the operational secret of the universe is funny to me because it's like the word of God himself.
Exactly.
And it's like, but one of the secret name of God is I am, is the surviving entity, is the persistent one, right? That's and it's an identity that it's just and it identifies itself by being. And
yeah, I think you have a wonderful ability to take this. You've done it a couple of times today, and I only recognized it last week. Is that you really are attracted to symbolism, association between symbolism, which is a sort of set theory. And the thing is that when you do that, you are correctly tying it back to the problem of the past, which is non-causal relations, right? The auto association between sets instead of causal relations. So what I like when you do this, despite the fact that it makes the hair on my back and my neck stand up, I do like it when you bring this stuff in for the audience, because you're even though I feel I need to explain it why this is interesting, is because this auto-associative symbolism is really close to intuition. It's why religions work and storytelling works, whatever. It's because it doesn't require the knowledge that a causal relation does. It just relies on your auto-association to identify a pattern through the telling of a story. And so I actually think this is really fascinating, but it's actually the entire problem. It's that we didn't have the knowledge of causal relations, and now we do. And so we can speak and think operationally in causal relations. But the problem is so many people are so habituated to what I call set theory or auto-associative thinking that they're so indoctrinated in it that they can't evolve to pay the cost of recursively thinking about what they just said as what's the causal relation here. So this explains how difficult the jump is. The reason theology and storytelling work is because you can use anthropomorphic characters with anthropomorphic measurements, sense, perception, emotion, whatever, without actually understanding causality. It's purely auto-associative. It's very emotional. It's incredibly effective for that reason. It also bypasses reason on purpose. This is important, is that it actually, by being inarticulate auto-associative properties of sets, it actually allows you to circumvent the demand for causal relations. So what we're doing is we're saying, actually, here's if God exists, he spoke one word and it was evolve. He didn't tell you the other half of it, or die, which was the other half.
That was right? Understood.
Yeah. And he didn't say, well, and you can die slowly by stagnation, or you can die by but quickly by making extremely bad choices. But it's either evolve or die. That's it. There's no other command of the universe. And that's just what we do with the triangles all the time, is create this one fucking symbol that tries to reduce all of that to positive, via positiva, via negativa, and via equilibria, right? Or trade, right? Which causes a stable relation to survive. So we're trying to make humans make a fundamental leap. They had to go from discrete knowledge to continuous knowledge. In other words, from a lot of things that were just learned as facts and into general rules, which we call science. So a very, very large number of general principles reduced to general rules. This is where there was just about half of the odd increase in intelligence over the century came from. Part of it's from cutting out the stupid people at the bottom through ending malnutrition and whatever else, abortion. But the rest of it happened from generalizing principles, which is what we call science, instead of all these independent fictions that were built on, well, God willed it, or whatever. So we found general rules. The thing is, we're trying to now take these from general rules and sets, which is how mathematics works, to one single rule, right, and operational construction from it.
Right.
So this is a big leap we're taking, right? But the same benefit we got from generalization of norms in religion to generalization of concepts in science and empiricism to generalization of everything into testimony. This is a big set of evolutionary leaps that we're asking people to take. But we have to overcome the fact that just like it took work to get you, it was easy to teach you parables. It was a little, you could advance that into theology. It was easier to teach you some general rules about the universe into a craft, right? But it was hard to teach people to move from those superstitious and traditional means of knowledge to general knowledge of empiricism and science. And it's as big a deal to move people from empiricism and science of sets, realize it's general rules of sets, to the one general rule of operational construction.
Right.
And it's very hard to do that. And so one of the reasons I love working with you is that you're demonstrating the journey,
right,
that people have to go through, because you have, you're painfully intellectually honest. You're willing to work extraordinarily hard. Just take the compliment, please. Thank you. But you have these normie. You're a good example of what normal people think if they're brought up in theology, philosophy, right, empiricism, and the sciences.
I'm recovering from the 20th century still.
Well, no, but at least you're advancing on top of it, right? I mean, but you could do that because you had an incentive. You stumbled across my work, right? You took the initiative to say, well, I'm going to get this Doolittle guy on track because he's got the right idea here, right? And you invested over a year in getting this point. I mean, right? And you didn't invest trivially. We spent hundreds and hundreds of hours at this together, right? So, I mean, it's a big fucking deal, but it doesn't mean that retrospectively we can't explain it as a really simple thing.
It's really simple.
It's really simple.
What's the interesting, the interesting function of it, it goes like this. So I bring in auto-associative functions because it resonates with the normies.
Yes.
And it needs to resonate with the normies.
Yes.
And then when you just show the causal relationships, yes, once they recognize the resonance, yes, because they want resonance.
Yes.
Because that will make them happy. It makes their heart warm. And then they will recognize an incentive to continue to study if they are in resonance.
Right. And so that's why I say, despite the fact that it raises the hair on the back of my neck, whenever you go into this stuff, I recognize the value of it. And I just like bite my tongue really hard like this. Anyway, but I'm just playing.
I know.
I'm just playing. But the point is that that's a big auto-associative,
Right.
empathic is really different from calculative.
Yes.
And we're giving people not only calculation by sets, which is what they've become accustomed to in the 19th and 20th centuries. We're taking them to operationalism, which gets born back in the 1830s, but it's taken till now to work. And if you look at history, that's what happens. It takes 4 generations or more. It takes a Babbage, a Turing, it takes the combination of a Hoppe and Popper. I mean, 2 guys who came in at completely opposite directions, a scientist and a philosopher, right? They both come together and Popper says, I learned more from you than I have from anybody except Tarski, right? And and Hayek says something similar, is that, well, I learned how to think about this problem from you. But I look at the both of them and I'm like, well, I understand what you're both are doing in context. It's just you're trying to make this conversion, right? And the only reason it happened was accidental. It didn't happen because philosophers succeeded. It didn't happen because the scientists succeeded. It happened because engineers succeeded and developed programming. And from programming, we looked back on the engineering and saw a theory, right? And from the theory, we generalized the theory to epistemology. And from epistemology, we generalized the theory to language. And from language, I got to, holy shit, that's the language. Language is just the means by which we describe the entire universe that is describable by us. And it's all measurements. And those measurements are just what's ever reducible to analogy to human experience. But all language is just the continuous recursive disambiguation of operations, which is objects and operations, into an identity that is unambiguously separable from the background and therefore persists, right? I mean, it's identity. And it's like, okay, well, we're just fucking computers. It's really goddamn annoying at that length. We're just binging and all this shit in and auto-associating it and then trying to create a pathway, which is, in other words, maze finding. And in other words, we're just... And the only reason you can do maze finding is because you have recursion. And how does the nervous system works? It works by no principle other than recursion, which is why the philosophers are lost because they can't even comprehend this concept, right? It's just recursive feedback loops, right? And which is all the time delay is what causes this sensation to compete with that sensation to cause a continuity or not, that's all the fucking nervous system does in vast numbers. And we end up, and so you can't even have an adult conversation with a philosopher because the idea of that is incomprehensible, and they're well invested in all this shit. Pseudoscience.
Okay, I'm going to talk to this behavioral economics, okay? And it's like this. It all comes down to the cheese. It all comes down to the cheese. And it's because it's like this. The rat doesn't see the maze, he just sees the cheese, right? We said this earlier. And it's like this. The problem of philosophy is too much cheese. There's no sense in even talking about the maze. I'm going to just run around in this room because there's so much cheese.
Cheese. I can find cheese anywhere I go look to find cheese.
Okay. Lord help us. The philosophers have developed silos with no walls and cheese.
So here's what I like about philosophy, right?
Okay.
Right? Is despite the fact that it's 99% 99 bullshit, if you just read Aristotle and science, you will actually, I would argue that you would get more from physics, economics, and law than you would get from studying anything else. That's really all. Economics is just behavior. Laws, falsification, science is constraints, right? I mean, there you go. I mean, that's the whole package, right? So on the other hand, what I like about people who study philosophy is they learn to question.
Yes.
And so I like that philosophy is full of so many errors and it's so bad and so much harm has come from it. I mean, how many people did Marx get killed?
And
how many people did Abraham get killed?
Oh my.
right? So how many people are going to pay the cost of the pseudoscience of the vax era? I knew that would get you.
That was
See,
close.
I don't. This isn't the bugaboo of mine, but I know it just makes the right go nuts. So I have to bring it up once in a while. So, so in the end, when you get to this, it's just I'd like us to study. I'd like us to study lying, as I've proposed it, instead of philosophy. In other words, philosophy is the art of sort of identifying all these things that are not right. But the great study of lying is it achieves what philosophy does, except scientifically.
Via negativa. It's categorization of lies and liars. Forensic.
Sometimes I realize what we've done here.
Yeah.
And I realize the great benefit is to man. And sometimes I look at what we've done here and I'm like, man is hopeless. Lying is so desirable. I mean, the brain is a wayfinding machine. Yeah. And it's good. And if it can say, oh, look, there's cheese over here, right? It will find a way to find to the pretend cheese. Right. And if you will all follow me to the cheese like the Pied Piper of Hamelin, that's right. Then I can sucker you morons into disappearing under the hill too, right? I mean, but meanwhile, you're paying me to follow you, to follow me to the promised cheese, right? Yet, so people say, wow, I get to follow somebody else who's doing my neural computation for me, right? And I get to follow, and I got social proof of all these other idiots following me. We don't really know we're following the Pied Piper of Abraham.
Oh my.
Did I just stick that in there for you?
Yeah, you did.
The Pied Piper of
social proof part.
And that social, the social proof says I can follow the Pied Piper of Marx and Abraham, or the Pied Piper of Chairman Z, or President Putin. You follow the Pied Piper.
The philosophy department head.
And the philosophy department head, just so what I learned in studying philosophy is it's very good if you're going to go into law, because what is law? It's organized as philosophy. But once you have what we've done, strictly operationally constructed, ultimately parsimonious natural law, then law is just a science.
Yes.
And lying is part of that science that we're trying to uncover. Perfect. And so these things stop being, but utility of, my view is the utility of philosophy is ended because it's been between the demarcation between truth and or science and truth is complete with our work, right?
That was a good introduction.
So the problem here is that we need to create social proof of the claim I just made, which shouldn't be terribly difficult, because there's just nothing we can't, literally nothing we can't answer. It's kind of exasperating how there's like nothing you can't answer, what we can't answer.
Why is that exasperating?
Well, because in order to create social proof, we have to exhaust an awful lot. It's not like we're saying, well, we can, we can exhaust this proof of a particular chemical bond in this particular set of proteins. It's pretty easy to claim, but when you say, oh, we can falsify everything, across every discipline, that's something quite difficult. So extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. Extraordinary proof in this case takes a lot of work because there's so many disciplines. But no matter what they come to you against, we're going to be able to do it because basically we've shown the underlying algorithm to the universe and the language we use to describe it across the before physical, during behavioral, and after evolutionary spectrum. So in any event, so that is where we're going, is to talk about truth and lies.
Right. Are you ready?
I'm like, it's 1 o'clock. Do I have the juice for this? I don't know.
Up to you, Kurt.
Because we've already been going 2 hours, right?
Yeah, approximately. It's up to you. we can hold off if you prefer till later in the week. Because I will either be available tomorrow or Thursday. I don't know what day works for you, but we can make your exposition at a later moment if you prefer.
I won't do it justice at my level.
You did good work today. We had a good little chat.
What we should do next time is just start off with it, and I'll review.
That would be great.
I definitely just ran out of gas. It's probably because I didn't have enough food. My energy level just.
Eat a peanut butter and not cinnamon on the toast. That's my theory.
Although it's Sunday and it's 1 o'clock, so I can still go out and all day breakfast and get an omelet.
All day breakfast sounds like it can go anytime. That'll be great.
So I have, I prepared, right? So I have this prepared.
Yes.
And so I bet I could use a few days to.
That'd be good.
To work on it. Because can I talk about this for a minute with you?
Certainly. Certainly.
I said we need to I was building up from the female and then going to cover the male. And what we discovered is it's better to do them together.
Yes.
Right? And put them parallel. So I think I want to avoid having to refit. No, I don't. I wanted to avoid having to readdress sex differences in cognition. And I wanted to start out with, can I share my screen for a second?
Yes.
I'm trying to see if this is going to work.
Okay. There you go.
Got a 1 instead of an L. I wanted to show sex differences across a big spectrum.
Oh.
Right. I had to screenshot this from an image I share all the time.
Oh.
And I because I can't load up the website until that's fixed this week. So I have a few so it turned some L's into ones. Yes. Anyway, so I wanted to start out with this, and I was hoping to continue it. And then once I got from there, I would start talking about sex differences in persuasion. In other words, get into language. And so this is like the female side, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, with faith, healing, storytelling, false promise, biblical critique, evasion, social construction. So I wanted to make this equally female and male.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that way we can show that the sexes both.
That's right.
Right. They practice these behaviors in this language.
Yes.
And then I can work through how it escalates.
Right.
Right.
I like that.
So my feeling is I'm going to have to fuck up a bunch of times in order to feel like I get it right.
Right.
In other words, does that make sense? I'm going to get it wrong a couple times in order to get it right. So that's how I was thinking of talking about it. Review male versus female cognitive differences, right? Because whereas people are trying to show similarities like IQ, personality, whatever, we're trying to show differences, how those differences manifest, and how those differences manifest in antisocial behavior, and how antisocial behavior manifests in verbal expression of antisocial behavior, right? We're going to try to show that. That's what I'm going to try to get across. And then I'm going to show this, and then work through the two hierarchies, and then we'll explore the hierarchies.
Wonderful.
And I think if I do that, I get a better take on grammars.
I think so. I'm
So
looking forward to it. I do.
So did that.
Yeah.
I didn't get any. That doesn't make sense from you.
No, not at all. Not at all. That was a very logical expositionary plan.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to take a shower, and I'm going to take myself out to breakfast. Me, myself, and I.
And there you go. Well, enjoy the company.
And I'll enjoy the company. Get with this. All right. Love you, brother. Thank you for today.
Yes, sir. Bye, y'all.
Oh. Like, subscribe, whatever. What's the other one? Ring the bell, whatever. Because it turns out they are happy. Unless you click the bell, you might even not get reminded. I've got some feedback from that.
That's that important, kids.
All right. Love you guys.
Bye-bye.